I'd like to look at a game played by forum member Germ. He was white. It was an interesting kind of closed position in the opening that could transpose into a Sicilian. And then white played e3 instead, so it got into this interesting position. And although unfortunately white blundered a piece in the opening, he fought back and actually equalized later in the game, and then it was black playing for a draw. So let's have a look. Starts off knight f3, c5, and now with e4 right away, white could transpose into the Sicilian. We played d4, e6, and again here, e4 could transpose into the Sicilian. But white played e3. I don't really like playing it to Sicilian. Perhaps Germ doesn't either, but it's a good way to sidestep those lines. Knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, knight bd2, b6, bishop d3. Now, black plays h6, which is a strange move. I don't really see the point. Generally, if black plays h6, it's with the idea of trying to prevent white from playing bishop g5, pinning the knight, but obviously you can't play that here. So h6 just sort of weakens the pawns on the king side, which isn't so good if the king is going to be castled. Generally, if you're castled, you don't want to have the pawns where they start out are the strongest they're going to be. If you move pieces like h6, all of a sudden squares like g6 are going to become weak. So you want to try to avoid moving pawns that are going to be in front of your king. So I played knight b3. This is kind of a mistake. It's not really clear what the knight is going to accomplish there. I think better would be something like castling and playing for e4. Playing in the center makes sense. Generally, most of the action on the chessboard, unless the center is closed, is going to revolve around the center. That's why knight b3, which puts the knight kind of awkwardly on the queen side, doesn't really accomplish that much. Furthermore, when black plays d5, now he's threatening c4, winning a piece. So the only option really is for white to either move his knight back or move his bishop or try c4, which no option is really that good. But maybe just something like this you have to play to avoid the fork. But white played bishop d2, overlooking the pawn fork, c4. Now this position now is just completely won for black because he's going to be up a piece. But the main thing to say about these positions like this is that this shows that when you're starting out playing chess, you really need to keep an eye on the tactics, because when you're a beginner, almost every game, and even at all levels, almost every game comes down to tactics and calculations. So white needed to be able to recognize right away that c4 was a threat. And the best way to improve your tactics is to solve tactics puzzles like our puzzle of the day, or go through tactics workbooks, or just playing lots of games, and you'll get used to that. But so as we can see, most games between beginners come down to tactics. So bishop d2 and c4, and now black should be winning. I mean, if this was like a tournament game, generally white would be reluctant to keep playing just because black has such a big advantage now. But bishop e7, although to white's credit, he played very tenaciously after this and had some good chances. b4. I like b4 because it sort of clamps down on this square, and also these pawns are going to be very tough to crack, and potentially this a pawn is going to be weak. b5. Now here b3 I think is a mistake. The pawn needs to be on b2 to have this structure because it defends c3 well. Once you've played b3, the c3 pawn can become very weak. It's now backwards. It's going to be hard for you to advance it without losing a pawn, and it's just going to become the c3 pawn is going to be a liability. That's why you want to keep your pawn on b2. Maybe something here like queen e2, putting pressure on this weak pawn. So b3 is not so good. Black castles, and now bishop d3. I like that. White is keying in on this weakness here of the b5 pawn. It's going to be awkward for black to defend. He's got to play something like rook b8. But then the a pawn is potentially weak, and maybe queen e2 is going to get some more pressure. So bishop d3 is good. a6. Now here, white overlooks an important tactic. Again, talking about tactics in these games. Bishop takes b5 will win a pawn. And although black is still better because he's up a piece, white is definitely making progress. He's won a pawn. Now the a pawn is weak. Black's knight is attacked. So after a6, you got to be able to see these tactics to take advantage of the situation. See how the pawn is pinned to the rook. But after a6, white played bishop c2, and another problem with that, even if this tactic wasn't here, is this just sort of wastes a tempo. White just played his bishop here and now is playing it back, and it isn't really clear what the bishop has accomplished. So again, after a6, bishop takes b5 would be a great move. So bishop c2, queen d6, h4, playing aggressively. as far as white's ideas in this position, he should be thinking about trying to mix things up and get a really complicated position, because it's the only way he can try to get something out of this, since black has a clear advantage. So I like that move. E5. This is good though for black. I mean, he's castled and white's king is in the center, so black is just going to rip things open and exploit his extra piece. Knight G5, an interesting idea. The idea being that this knight shouldn't really be taken by black. Although black could probably survive this. But the idea is that, say this knight moves, then bishop h7, king h8, bishop f5 check, and now king g8. Sorry, I messed up. If bishop... No, let's go back. Here, white can play bishop g6. The idea being king g8, and now rook h8, king takes, queen h5, and checkmate. So as we can see, black needs to be very careful about taking the knight that's on g5. Although he can probably defend with something like g6. Maybe. But it's sort of risky. So after knight g5, black cannot take that knight, or shouldn't. So that just shows that, white, this is good. White's mixing it up a little because this adds some risk for black. So h5 takes, knight takes. Now queen b1. Not so sure about queen b1, just because it would be much stronger if the queen was here and the bishop was here, because the queen will be threatening to attack, whereas this bishop can't really do much. So I think better might be something like bishop b1 with the idea of playing queen c2 next move. So just something to think about. So white plays queen b1, knight e4, bishop takes, queen takes, and all of a sudden we have a few threats. Black blunders now. He should just play something like bishop g5, and his position is just clearly better. But he plays knight d3 check, and then king f1, and now he should again play bishop g5, and his position is clearly better. But he plays f5, and again a tactic. These tactics are all that decide these games, so if you want to win at chess when you're starting out, you should really study these tactics. White has queen takes a8, and now it's gone from black being much better to black probably struggling for equality. Although, as we'll see, black has... this is pretty much a draw. It's very even after a few tactics. He plays knight takes f2, king takes f2, queen takes d2 check, king f1. And now the really weak position of white's king will probably mean this will be a draw. As we'll see. f4, trying to open up lines. That's good. Queen d3 might be good, but now e4, and now here black just has a draw by perpetual check, just because the white king is so awkwardly placed. Queen d3, king g1, queen e3. You can maybe come here, but he'll just check, and we see that this is just there's gonna be endless checks. And if he comes here, then we have queen takes c3, winning material. So that's gonna be winning. So white can't allow that, so he's just got to keep going back and forth over here and just getting checked by the queen. So that'll be a draw by perpetual check. However, black misses that and plays bishop g5, h takes g5, and now again black should be playing for perpetual check. He plays f3, which is a major blunder. This allows white to win, again with a well, not really a tactic, but white didn't play this, but queen d5 check is just winning. After forces the queen trade because it's check, and then takes. And now this pawn is going to be a problem. White is up 2 pawns and an exchange. Wait, 1 pawn and an exchange, and this pawn is very far advanced. Black can try something like bishop e7, but rook d1. And this is just a clearly winning endgame. Something like... So after f3, black blunders, and queen d5 will just win. But unfortunately, white also blunders, plays e5, overlooking again... miscalculating that black can just play queen g2, king e1, queen e2, checkmate. So I think what we learned from this game is that, first of all, white's king was very vulnerable because it never really got around to castling, so you do want to protect your king. But also just that in these kinds of beginner games, tactics are by far the most important thing, and by studying tactics, that's really how you're going to win. Because as we saw, black won a piece with a tactic, but then he miscalculated and gave away his rook, and then white was all of a sudden winning, and black had to struggle for a draw. So we see that the thing to focus on at this level is just tactics, tactics, tactics. But overall, an interesting game.